The trail at the edge of the whispering forest stretched out, a narrow vein of packed earth cutting into the dense growth. 6 figures stood in a jagged line, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. Zoe shifted her weight, her toes digging into the dirt. Next to her, Courtney, Polly, Serena, Yolanda, and Olivia mirrored the stance, each one tightening their laces with rhythmic, sharp tugs. The air between them held no conversation. It was thick, heavy with the sort of focus that turns friends into rivals for the duration of a race. A few yards ahead, Mr. Harold stepped onto the trail. He held a stopwatch in his left hand, his thumb hovering over the button. He looked down the line, catching the gaze of each runner. He waited for the rustle of leaves to die down and for the breathing to steady. Every muscle in the group was coiled, leaning forward, bodies straining against the pull of gravity. Mr. Harold drew a breath, held it, and raised his hand high above his head. The forest went deathly still. The signal was ready. Mr. Harold barked the word. The sound shattered the silence and the group lunged forward in a single, kinetic wave. Zoe reacted first, her lead foot finding purchase on the packed earth, driving her body into the open air of the trail. Courtney was a fraction of a second behind, her stride lengthening as she forced her pace to match Zoe. They pulled away from the others instantly. The space between the start line and the first bend in the path closed, with terrifying speed. Zoe kept her head low, eyes tracking the uneven ground, her arms pumping rhythmically to sustain the momentum. Courtney held the same line just half a pace to the side, her breathing already sharp and audible in the quiet woods. Neither looked back. The rest of the group, Polly, Serena, Yolanda, and Olivia, followed in a tight, scrambling formation, but they were already fighting for space behind the 2 leaders. Zoe felt the vibration of footsteps behind her, a steady, thundering rhythm that warned her not to let up. She pushed harder, her muscles burning, and cut into the first curve of the forest trail. The race was no longer a theory. It was raw, physical exertion. The trail narrowed sharply as the sound of rushing water grew louder. A bubbling stream cut across their path, its surface broken by uneven, moss-slicked stones. Zoe slowed her momentum, her boots skidding slightly on the damp earth at the bank. Polly surged forward, ignoring the mud. She reached the first stone, planted her lead foot with absolute precision, and shifted her weight. She did not hesitate. Polly leaped to the second stone, her arms windmilling once to correct her balance before she stuck the landing. Serena was right behind her, mirroring the movement. She did not break her stride, treating the erratic rocks like a solid sidewalk. She pushed off the bank, mid-air for a heartbeat, and landed firmly on the center stone. Water splashed against the soles of her shoes. Behind them, the others slowed to a crawl, navigating the crossing with cautious, measured steps. The gap between the leaders and the rest of the group widened as Polly and Serena cleared the far bank. They climbed out of the streambed, their breathing steady, and immediately accelerated back into their run. The stream was behind them, but the path ahead remained treacherous and steep. Yolanda and Olivia hit the wildflower patch a moment later. The path had all but vanished under a surge of tall, tangled stems and heavy blooms. Yolanda reached out, pushing aside a low-hanging branch that whipped back with a sharp snap against the air. Olivia followed close, her head ducked low to avoid the interlocking canopy of leaves. As they broke into the densest section, a sudden cloud of butterflies erupted from the petals, filling the space with a frantic flutter of wings. It was a chaotic, living obstacle. Yolanda swerved left to avoid a thicket, her shoulder grazing a heavy cluster of foliage that showered her in stray pollen. She shielded her eyes with one hand, maintaining her forward momentum even as the ground grew soft beneath her weight. Olivia tracked her path, weaving through the gaps in the brush, her arms working to sweep aside the invasive vines. They moved in a scramble of limbs and lunges, fighting the resistance of the growth. Then, the dense color gave way. The path opened up once more, firm and clear. They surged out of the meadow, gasping for air, their legs moving in a synchronized rhythm as they pushed to regain the time lost in the brush. The trail shifted without warning. The flat, packed earth gave way to a sharp, rising incline that cut directly into the forest floor. Courtney led the charge, but her pace faltered within 20 paces. The ground here was loose, shifting underfoot with every stride, forcing them to dig their heels into the dirt just to keep from sliding backward. The rhythm of the group shattered. Breath turned into harsh, ragged gasps that echoed against the trees. Zoe felt the burn deep in her calves. She leaned forward, hands clawing at the air for balance, but the grade was too aggressive. She planted her hands firmly on her knees, her back arching as she fought for a lungful of oxygen. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up. The path stretched ahead, a daunting, vertical stretch of dust and roots that seemed to mock their progress. Her muscles trembled with the effort of holding her position. She stood frozen for a second, legs locked and shaking, feeling the full weight of the climb pulling at every fiber of her body. The challenge was no longer about speed, it was about sheer physical endurance against the mountain. Zoe extended her hand, fingers locking with Olivia to haul her up the final, slippery bank of the trail. They crested the ridge in a tangle of limbs, lungs burning, and staggered onto the flat summit. One by one, the others pulled themselves over the lip of the hill. They stood in a jagged line, chests heaving, silence descending as the struggle of the climb faded into the hum of the forest. The wind had dropped here. The air was cool against their damp skin. Zoe stood at the very edge of the plateau, her boots planted wide, looking down the long, sweeping slope. Below them, the finish line banner hung between two ancient oaks, its fabric barely twitching in the stagnant air. It looked miles away. The group did not speak. They stood rooted, watching the distance they had yet to conquer. The forest seemed to hold its breath with them, waiting for the next movement. Every muscle in their legs was coiled, held in a state of suspended tension. They were no longer runners, they were observers, measuring the drop, calculating the descent, and bracing for the final, inevitable release of energy that would carry them home. Courtney broke the stillness. "Final sprint!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the trees. The command acted like a trigger. Zoe did not wait for a second breath. She pivoted, her weight shifting forward, and gravity took over. The group surged, crossing the ridge in a sudden, violent release of kinetic energy. They hit the slope together, a singular force of motion. The ground beneath them groaned under the impact of 12 feet striking the earth in rapid, aggressive succession. It was a rhythmic thundering, a drumbeat of dust and dirt rising in small clouds behind them. Polly led the initial plunge. Her body leaned at a dangerous angle to maintain momentum. Serena and Yolanda followed, their arms pumping at their sides, faces locked in intense focus. The forest blurred into a kaleidoscope of green and brown. Every step was a gamble against the steepness of the descent, yet none of them slowed. They moved not as individuals, but as a single, accelerating unit, their feet hammering the packed earth with a velocity that defied the incline. The finish line banner below grew larger with every stride, a flicker of color in the distance as they threw themselves into the downward rush. The descent turned into a controlled fall. Zoe felt the vibration of every impact travel up her shins, a stinging rhythm that matched her racing heart. Beside her, Courtney and Olivia were neck and neck, their breathing harsh and rhythmic. Then, the path dipped sharply, a treacherous stretch of loose gravel threatening to send them sprawling. Polly hit the patch first, her arms windmilling for balance before she regained her stride. The group did not break formation. They leaned into the incline, bodies angled against the pull of gravity, legs churning with mechanical precision. The forest around them dissolved into a frantic smear of emerald and shadow. Every muscle in their calves and thighs burned, a searing heat that urged them to stop, yet the finish line grew larger, the colors of the banner vibrating in their peripheral vision. Serena and Yolanda pushed forward, closing the gap, their faces tight with exertion. There was no room left for thought, only the visceral need to reach the line. They were a singular, thundering wave of momentum, carving a path through the dust, their lungs screaming for air as they poured every remaining ounce of energy into the final yards of the descent. The finish line banner snapped in the wind, a sudden target in the chaos of their vision. Zoe saw the others closing in, a wall of focused movement. The competitive edge that had fueled their sprint began to dissolve, replaced by a sudden, shared intent. They were no longer racing against each other. They were racing to reach the end as one. Courtney adjusted her pace, dropping back a fraction to align with Olivia. Serena and Polly synced their strides, their feet striking the earth in a single, heavy rhythm. The ground seemed to vibrate with their unified impact. Mr. Harold stood motionless, watching as the gap closed. The distance vanished. With a final, explosive push, they surged forward, their bodies leaning into the void. Their chests hit the invisible plane of the finish line at the exact same moment. The momentum carried them forward for another 3 steps before their legs gave way. They halted in a tangled, breathless group, chests rising and falling in unison. The thundering of their feet ceased, replaced by the sharp, ragged sound of 7 people gasping for air. They stood locked together, shoulders brushing, chests heaving, as the silence of the forest rushed back in to replace the roar of their sprint. Mr. Harold stepped forward, the ice in his pitcher clinking a sharp, rhythmic sound against the glass. He poured, the stream of lemonade catching the light as he filled each plastic cup. The girls reached out, their hands trembling from the exertion, and gripped the cool surfaces. The first swallows were long and steady. They sat back into the grass, feeling the ground settle beneath them as the shade of the ancient oaks provided a reprieve from the heat. Zoe leaned forward, tracing a line in the dirt with a twig, pointing toward a ridge visible through the trees. Courtney and Olivia leaned in, their heads close as they debated the incline of the far slope. Polly and Serena nodded, adding their own markers to the map while Yolanda and Olivia checked the terrain. The exhaustion that had gripped them minutes ago now felt like a shared victory. They laughed, the sound rising and blending with the rustle of leaves above. Tomorrow was already taking shape in the dirt. They packed their bags, their movements deliberate and synchronized, ready to leave the forest with the memory of the trail still fresh in their strides.